What is something that is actually more traumatizing than people realize? Story 1. Concussion. Got my first at age 60. My memory was really good before, nearly photographic good. Now, I forget the names of people, objects, and almost anything. It's like part of my brain got locked up, and I don't have a key for it. Story 2. I'm 8 years from a TBI sustained from a tree limb falling on me. It's hard because people can't see the issues. But I struggle so much neurologically, functionally, mentally. I've lost a lot of beautiful memories. Almost all my support system disappeared. I've almost no close family, and I've not been able to keep a partner. I'm struggling to find work that can accommodate my issues. The future just looks so bleak. I'm as good as I'm going to get in terms of recovery. I never could have imagined I'd be here. People don't realize even mild concussions and head injuries can be utterly devastating, and a lot of times you never make a full recovery, and life becomes so much harder to function. Story 3. I got into a car accident that gave me a really bad concussion. I went to a university-run physical therapy, and they actually had a top neurologist who was making steps to show the world that a concussion is not simply a concussion and 7 days in the dark. Turns out you need to exercise the brain just like any other muscle after an injury. For memory, it's memory games until your brain is tired and then give it a break. Similar concept for reading. I couldn't read a page out of a book for a year after the accident. Not because I couldn't read, but because my brain literally couldn't focus on the story to keep it coherent. She studied me a little longer than I needed it for because I smoke a lot of weed, and she wanted to see the effects of that on concussion and recovery. Story 4. People always associate CTE with professional football players, but my brother had it despite never doing anything past local men's league hockey. He was stage 2 when he died at 40. At that point, your frontal lobe has enough lesions that you're not capable of thinking through your decisions or impulses. He became a different person. And in his moments of lucidity, he knew something was wrong with his brain. All of that, just from playing hockey, some car accidents, and whatever teenage shenanigans he got up to. Story 5. Working for a crap boss or supervisor. It plays on your brain. 2 months ago, I finally got out from under my awful boss who everyone hates and moved to a new team. Just a mean, awful woman who always talks to you with a nasty tone. I was able to get my old manager back, a wonderful woman who was the one that hired and mentored me. Yesterday, they informed me the mean, nasty supervisor was getting a promotion and they are swapping the teams between the two managers, so now I'm back with her. Story 6. I was the only person on a team of 12 that could deal with a seriously horrible boss. Like, this lady is mentally ill and cannot handle stress, and I work in a very stressful industry. People would ask how I could deal with her, and I realized that I kinda just treated her like she was handicapped, and her handicap was her seriously messed up brain. Once I kinda depersonalized it, it was just easier to deal with her. Side note though, several of my family members have worked with mentally handicapped people for most of their lives. I've been around plenty of people who could not control the way they behaved. Also, definitely not saying that anyone should have to deal with a toxic boss. It's not good for our mental health. But finding ways to protect your own mental health until you can get out of the situation is beneficial. Story 7. I worked at a coffee shop for 3 months after getting super burned out working in special ed during COVID because I thought it would be a good reset. And the management at the coffee shop was so horrible I ended up in therapy for a year due to workplace anxiety. Story 8. Trauma seems dramatic, but getting laid off really messed me up. Every day waking up with a pit in your stomach. I still think about it daily at my current job, and it's been years. Edit. Reading all the comments is actually kind of cathartic. I appreciate all of you. Story 9. VE gone through it twice. The first time I was married but had no kids and had immediate replacement options, the company hired me back as a consultant/contractor. It seemed like no big deal. The second time I had a family with 2 children and a mortgage. When they told me, it took me a second to process it, and I literally couldn't breathe for what seemed like 5 minutes. I really loved working there too and didn't see it coming. In retrospect, it was the start to a major step up in my life. Decided to move my family to a bigger city, got a job at a company that respected me more, and more importantly, mentored me appropriately, and have ended up making way more than I ever would have if I had stayed there after subsequent moves. But I'll never forget that feeling of not knowing how I was going to take care of my family. Story 10. Emotional neglect. It leaves deep, invisible scars. Definitely. My mom left when I was 3, and my dad chose to be with a woman for the rest of my childhood who admittedly didn't like children. She refused to talk to me unless I spoke first, was dismissive, never made any attempt to get to know me, and would passive-aggressively sigh if I did something that even slightly annoyed her. It turned me into an anxious mess. I am always apprehensive and apologetic even if I'm not at fault. I have trouble getting close to people. I have terrible self-esteem. Story 11. I was jealous of my friends because of their moms. Many times I'd be at a friend's house as a kid/teenager and my friend's mom would invite me to stay and have dinner with them. It was so foreign to me. It was like, why are you being nice? What's the catch? I didn't realize this is a rather common thing, mostly because my mother simply wouldn't feed me. She and my stepfather simply ignored my existence. They had the money and could, they just chose not to. I'd be 13 and they'd cook a frozen pizza. I only knew because I'd walk upstairs and see the empty pizza cardboard with cheese sitting empty. Likewise, I often ate the cheese sandwich of shame. Again, even though she had the money to buy me lunch tickets. Oh, and she'd harp on me about my crooked teeth and how I need to see an orthodontist at like 13. You're the mom, you're the one with the money, and you're the one who's supposed to make the appointment. We had the insurance. Needless to say, I still have crooked teeth at 44. Story 12. The lasting effects of a mental illness. Even after you've gotten through the worst of it, there will still be lingering symptoms, combined with the grief of having lost so much of your life and your personality to it. Edit. Kind of disheartening to see that this is my most upvoted comment to date. I didn't expect this to resonate with so many people, and I just want to remind everybody who's struggling that you're not alone and that there are people out there able and willing to help. Thanks for the upvotes in gold, and stay strong. Story 13. I had untreated social anxiety disorder as a kid and teen and skipped out on so many opportunities to make friends, go to events, join sports teams/clubs, date, and develop a stronger sense of self-esteem and social skills because of it. Now as an adult, I've had to make up for underdeveloped skills and experiences I never got as a child. It's heartening to see how far I've come, but there is a sense of grief at what I could have had or been had my parents taken me to therapy. Story 14. Friends breakups. I used to have a best friend for years. We liked a lot of similar things, were both a bit different and just clicked in so many ways. Then out of seemingly nowhere they started telling things I told them in secret to classmates, who would laugh at me. At first I wondered how people could know these things and they acted sympathetic. Then they accidentally send a message with gossip about me meant for someone else with a similar name to me, before you could delete messages sent on WhatsApp. I broke off all contact after that, and I've never been able to trust anyone really. None of my current friends really know my secrets, even if it's silly things. I'm still just scared that anything I can tell me could be used against me at some point when they decide to turn on me. Story 15. Being screamed at. Grew up in a household where there were constant arguments. Even witnessing someone being yelled at makes my whole body go tense. Even if people are screaming for celebratory reasons. Your body just associates any loud talking or screaming as a bad thing, and your body just reacts as if you were back in those awful times before. I remember for years, after leaving my bio family, I would still flinch and immediately start crying with intense adrenaline whenever my BEF would get excited and scream for joy over something. He would be so confused as to why I was freaking out, and it's hard to explain unless you've gone through it. Your body and brain just remembers the awful moments, and it's almost like reliving the feelings even though you're completely safe now. Story 16. Getting fired. Being let go in a restructuring, and your boss doesn't try to save you in any way. After saying what an asset you are. Even with staff begging for you to be kept. Just happened to me to back J in August. The toll that took on me and my self-confidence was insane. Corporate sucks. The company shut down so many locations and got rid of so many people, only to reopen the locations 2 weeks after closing. My store never closed. Story 17. I got fired twice this year. First one was 2 weeks after a great performance review. The other from my dream job over a mistake I didn't make. The person who had the project right before me made the mistake, but their mistake had a large enough impact that they had to close 3 offices and shut down my project. They didn't have another project to put me on. Months of working insane 80+ HR weeks, traveling constantly and living in hotels, dealing with a client that sucked, not seeing my dogs or my partner, to be fired and have an entire project shut down because of a mistake my predecessor made. The tea I have on that workplace would get them shut down so fast, but then hundreds of good people would lose their jobs. That anxiety is gonna stay with me for a long time. Story 18. The death of a pet. I lost my cat of 17 years a month after losing my mother. I cried more over losing my cat. Not that I didn't love my mom and grieve her passing, or cry hysterically, but I also had time to come to terms with her death before it happened. Now my cat was there 24/7. He slept with me, cuddled with me on the couch, and never let me poop alone. He was always there, so his absence was a constant painful thing. I still miss him so much. Story 19. Non-serious car accidents. When I was younger, I was with my grandpa and we got hit from the right at an intersection. No one was hurt in the accident at all. I went bowling like 20 minutes later. Yet it's been years and I still get that anxiety and panicked feeling when a car is pulling up to an intersection from the right. Story 20. I have a permanent fissure in my left shoulder blade from a fender bender at a traffic light. She said, "I'm so sorry, I was looking at a receipt." I was in physical therapy for a year, and I no longer externally rotate my left arm. I can no longer wear a bra. Sitting up, standing with my shoulders back, and driving are painful. Lying down is painful. That was accident number 3 of 4. All in a 6-year period. Rear-ended every time, and every time it was dubbed someone else's fault. I'm not even 30. The trauma sucks. I have to drive every day, and it's so anxiety-inducing. People have assumed that I faked the pain for a settlement. I only got $6,000. I'm still trying to go about my life as normal, but if it's this bad after only 2 years, I'm not excited for the future. Story 21. Being a whistleblower. Reaching the point where you know you have to speak up is a breaking moment in itself when you realize that staying silent is no longer an option, despite knowing the risks. Following through and blowing the whistle is isolating and terrifying. You're putting your trust in systems and people who may not be there to protect you. The fear of retaliation, the loss of relationships, and the feeling of being labeled as the enemy all take their toll. And even after it's over, the impact lingers long after everyone else has moved on. The world expects you to return to normal, but the experience leaves a deep mark. It changes you. Trust becomes harder, and the weight of what you did and why never fully leaves you. I don't regret it, but I am not who I used to be anymore. Edit Saturday morning, October 26th. I just woke up and I see this clearly struck a nerve with many, so I am going to add details to help guide others as far as possible without compromising myself. In my country, whistleblowers are protected by law, so I knew doing it meant they couldn't come after me financially or fire me. That said, I also know how little the law protects you if the company decides to make your life at work for doing it, hence I did it anonymously and stayed anonymous. A friend who works in HR told me, "No one wants to hire a whistleblower, they are considered troublemakers, so tell no one about this ever." Since I was whistleblowing on the CEO, I knew I couldn't use the proper channels, as per the company's whistleblower directive, so I reported the person directly to the board with HR in copy. This meant everyone at the top, owner, board, and CEO, was compromised, and they had to bring in external lawyers to investigate. This is not necessarily the case in other countries, so check this before you do it. I was high enough in the system that I not only heard how the CEO reacted to this happening, they were furious that someone did this and were on the hunt for the whistleblower, claiming the board supported them. They even made a top 5 list, openly talking to the management level about who was on it. I was also sat in the same office floor, so hearing doors slam, whispered conversations, hurried footsteps, and raised voices behind locked doors caused me a lot of tension. Trust no one. I sat around listening to colleagues speculating about who the whistleblower was like it was some reality show, gleefully marinating in gossip instead of doing something themselves. The CEO had been causing havoc in the company many years before I joined, so for years, people had done nothing. When they finally had the opportunity, NO1 stepped up. In fact, I sat around listening to colleagues who were leaders, while their staff listened to how appalled they were and how much they hated what had been done. As a last note, I did end up leaving the company in the end, as I lost all respect for the company and my colleagues. While it was probably the worst time of my entire life, I want to underline that I do not regret it. Standing up for myself and doing what was right made me able to claim back the power and control I felt had been taken from me. That said, I probably won't stomach doing something like this again, and I've lost a little fight and faith in humanity because of it. Story 22. Parents not teaching you basic life skills. When I turned 18, my parents never taught me how to do anything, so I had to learn everything from Google and sometimes my adult coworkers. Thankfully, I had someone there who taught me that stuff. Hearing about people's families giving them life advice and skills just hurts. Story 23. Early childhood trauma. Not holding your kid, not caring for basic needs, if the house is a toxic environment. Even in early years, it has a lifelong impact on how our attachment style develops and how well we handle our emotional regulation. This can cause massive issues down the road. A lot of people think children won't understand due to their age, and think it won't bother the kid or they won't remember, or with any excuse they want to use. However, they don't need to understand for it to be traumatic. Early childhood development is so vital to having stability and proper foundation to being a functioning adult down the line. Story 24. Being bullied. I think I traumatized my bully TBH. In middle school, a dude kept touching my balls and ass and would teabag me for months in the hallway. Obviously, he would never care how much I told him to stop. Eventually, I told him if he doesn't stop, I'm going to get violent. And then at lunchtime, he beelined right to me from across the room and dumped my food on my head. I stood up and said, "Remember what I said will happen if you don't stop." He just stood there with a smirk. So I reached into my pocket, got my pan, and stabbed him in his stomach as hard as I could. Dude yelled out a harrowing scream, called me crazy, and was walked to the nurse's office. He had to get stitches. Same dude ended up doing 10 years in prison for getting gas cans, spilling the gas around the perimeter of a house and lighting it on fire, trying to burn everyone inside with no escape. Story 25. Being homeless. Doesn't matter how bad you think it was. Is a lot of risk. I grew up in a fairly affluent family, and when I was in graduate school, everything changed and I was homeless for a while. For the first time in my life, I didn't know what I would eat that day. I was fine and came out of it okay, but my relationship with food has never been the same. I hoard food in a way that I can't explain to people. I'm in great shape and a small person, but I can't leave food on a plate. I can't not take food home from an event where there is extra. My relationship with food is so different than when I was a child, and I don't know how to fix it. Story 26. I once got into an argument with some friends. The topic was politics and a policy. My view was largely motivated from the trauma of poverty and homelessness. I never want to feel it or live it again, and I can't imagine how much harder it has to be for people out there with children or family members involved. These friends shrugged it off, saying, "Being poor isn't that bad." I still to this day think about them saying that and looking at them like they have 3 heads, LOL. Story 27. ICU stays. I've been intubated twice this year, and ICU delirium is so real and so awful and scary you really have no sense of reality, and it makes processing anything next to impossible. I hallucinated my dead boyfriend decomposing in front of me and just generally had no idea what was real. Story 28. I managed to stay out of the ICU, but 2 years ago I went from perfectly fine to very ill over the course of a single afternoon. I was hospitalized for 2 weeks, went septic, had a collapsed lung, had 3 surgeries, and took months to get back to full health. Now I still get anxiety attacks with even the slightest hint of a similar symptom. Any kind of sickness has me waiting for the shoe to drop. I drag my kids to the clinic whenever they have anything more than a sniffle. I've felt like I'm walking on thin ice at all times for 2 years. Story 29. Having depression. I am genuinely traumatized from the times I've been so close to leaving the earth on my own terms. The feeling is indescribable. I don't see enough people talking about how after crawling out of that deep of a hole, it's genuinely so scary to think about it happening again. The worst is not being able to explain exactly how you feel, so you end up keeping everything to yourself and/or self-isolating so you can be unwell in private. Story 30. Living with an invisible chronic condition, in my case, Crohn's disease. In my wife's case, fibromyalgia. We both look fine on the outside, but frequently deal with different types of unseen pain and discomfort that others have trouble relating to. Even though they're different conditions, it's nice that we each have a brief understanding of what the other is experiencing. I have severe eczema. On most days my face doesn't look bad, but every other part of my body can easily be cracked and either oozing or bleeding and itchy every waking second, but it's just not visible with clothes. I recently started a new medicine that's working wonders. Man, my head voice telling me not to scratch has not been this quiet in years. Story 31. I have EDS, Ehlers-Danlos syndrome. It isn't horrible most of the time, but when it flares up it feels like there is glass in my joints, right hip, right hand, left shoulder, both knees, and sometimes my neck. Being 30 with a cane was not my bingo sheet. I hate using it in public because a lot of elderly people give me crap about it. There are other symptoms, but none are as bad. The worst part of all of it is EDS was trending on social media, and now a ton of people self-diagnose themselves with it because they are flexible. So if someone has actually heard of it, there is a preconceived notion that it is another fake disorder. Luckily, I have a good support network and colleagues who are willing to help with things that some days I cannot do. Story 32. The social media aspect can be good and bad, but I get what you mean. For me, it was only through social media that I learned about it and was able to seek a diagnosis. I've had joint issues and all the comorbidities that come with EDS since I was 4 years old, and it only got worse from there, LOL. My childhood was essentially spent in hospitals, and I've been misdiagnosed with childhood arthritis, fibromyalgia, been told it's all mental, etc. When I stumbled upon people talking about their experience with EDS on social media, I cried because everything they described was all me. I had never even heard of it before then, which is crazy, considering how many doctors I've seen and how obvious my symptoms were, looking back. So for me, it did start as a self-diagnosis, and it took several more doctors before I found one that was EDS informed and willing to listen. So in that way, I am so grateful that awareness is growing, as it was only through social media that I was able to find answers and get appropriate treatment. But yeah, with any condition, there's always going to be people claiming they have it when they really don't, so I get frustrated. And I could rant for days about not only the medical trauma of being gaslit for years and being told to push through the pain, that I was imagining it and I only hurt so much since I was focusing on it, etc. But also random people's reactions when I show outward signs I'm not doing well. I'm young, 21, and relatively active and healthy. I ran a half marathon last week. Every day has its own roulette of issues, and some days I'll be bedbound, but all of that is to say, from the outside, I look young and healthy. I work retail, and one day I had dislocated my hip the day prior, so I was using my cane. One dude asked me what I did, and I didn't have to spoons to explain, so I just said I have a bad hip, since that hip seems to go out weekly. He looked me up and down, scoffed, and condescendingly said, "Sweetie, you're too young to have hip issues. If you're going to fake something, at least make it believable," and walked out. I've also been yelled at by a random person for using my handicapped parking card literally a month after major spinal surgery. I could go on for days, but I'll spare you, LOL. Hugs from a fellow zebra. Story 33. Watching someone you love pass away. I mean, I didn't expect it to be good or easy, but OMG, I'll never be the same as the day my mom passed away. Story 34. One of the hardest things for me has been that people are really supportive and understanding of grief in the short term, but those who haven't experienced it don't understand that grief doesn't really end, it just changes. So now, 6 years out from losing my brother and 3 years out from losing my mom, most people don't understand that I still think about it daily and I still have moments when I fall to pieces. I'm not sure that will ever stop. And I'm not saying people aren't kind, because they absolutely are. It's just a feeling that's hard to comprehend until it's happened to you. Story 35. While preparing for my dad to go, I felt fortunate that I had aunts and uncles around me who had experienced watching someone die. Information and knowledge helps with my anxiety, so knowing to count breaths and what signs to look for made me feel calmer. My uncle, a retired fireman and paramedic, even said he considered it a privilege to be with someone as they passed. Unfortunately for me, my dad did not go slowly peacefully in his sleep as expected. He was in a lot of pain and I was trying to soothe him, and evidently what I was doing was not helpful, so he groaned and stopped, rolled over, and died as I held his hand. My mom and my aunt were in the room with me, but I was the first one to know. I don't recall his eyes dilating, but I could tell he was gone. It truly was like the spark of life was gone from them. I had nightmares for months about it. It did not feel beautiful or privileged. While other grieving family members spoke of lovely visits when they dreamt of my dad, I was literally terrified to go to sleep. Story 36. Being left out. Even though I'm accepted and have a pretty strong voice in my fraternal order, I still have intense feelings of loneliness left over from growing up that I have a hard time expressing. Being left out, even inadvertently, will make me feel like someone put bricks on my chest. It makes me feel so other. It's difficult to explain. I manically invite people to things because I don't want anyone to feel that way. Story 37. I don't think people realize how traumatizing it is for kids whenever their parents argue in front of them. Even an argument on a lower scale or just tense talking, let alone shouting, calling names, and domestic abuse. I blocked a lot of it out, but occasionally I get flashbacks to my parents' divorce and how ugly it was when I was a kid. Fighting, screaming matches on the front lawn, the time my mom said Dad was coming back to try and make it work, but it was only a clever ploy to grab the last of his stuff. He literally waited for her to run out to get some groceries for dinner and then packed the rest of his stuff and left. Story 38. Other people's apathy. I'm a teacher and it used to be that I loved my job. Post-COVID, the kids don't participate in anything. I used to be able to have discussions in my class, students would ask questions, we'd go off on tangents, it was great. Now I'm mostly listening to the sound of my own voice. It's affected me a lot and I have nightmares about the complete lack of motivation in the people around me. Story 39. Being robbed. I got mugged over 20 years ago. The one and only time I went trick-or-treating. I was 11. This year is the first year I've agreed to take my kids trick-or-treating. We've done parties before now, and I only agreed because some of their school friends live nearby and we will all go together. When I did it, I was with my sister and her friends, 14 to 15 years old. We were invited into people's houses and went in, got followed the entire time, and then ultimately mugged on the corner of our own street. My sister and her friends ran away while I beat my mugger over the head with my toy sword. Turns out they were a bunch of teens. The one I beat actually lived down the same road as us. He's in prison for now. So, yeah. It sticks with you. Story 40. Childbirth. What makes it worse is that you're strongly discouraged from talking about it. So many people pass it off like, but it's natural for women. Women have been doing it since the beginning. Their bodies were made for it. Like that makes it any less painful or traumatic. Especially when it comes to birth complications, being pressured into having a child, not having the support you need while going through those 9 months and childbirth, and even months after the birth. Postpartum depression is a real thing and women with it are made to feel guilty about having it. Story 41. Teasing. When I was younger, people would tease me with the opposite sex. Just being close to a girl will get you teased by old relatives and even classmates. It was so uncomfortable that even now I can't get close to a girl and form a romantic relationship because I feel awkward. I found it more calming and peaceful to be friends with guys, hence why I think I switched teams. Story 42. Infertility and miscarriages. Dealt with both. First, you are dealing with wondering why you can't get pregnant and need to be happy for everyone else who gets pregnant. And then when you do get pregnant and start dreaming of all the hope you have for your little one, you find out you've lost them. It happens so often, yet it's still pretty stigmatized. And unless you go through either one, you don't realize how traumatizing it can be. Story 43. Undiagnosed neurodivergence. Simple tasks like making a sandwich or doing laundry can feel as difficult as holding your hand in a bucket of ice, but if you don't push through and do it without showing that it's a struggle, you're seen as lazy or selfish or manipulative. Suddenly you're 30 and having panic attacks every time you try to do laundry, and probably have to figure out on your own that you've developed complex PTSD from just existing. Story 44. Your first period. Men, this can be horrific. I'll take it a step further and say puberty in general for young girls. You spend your childhood not thinking twice about your body or appearance. It's just a vehicle to run, jump, bike, swim, and play. Then suddenly it feels like it's betraying you and you become hyper-aware of it. It's going through changes that society says aren't acceptable, like having hair in your armpits, legs, bikini line, but you can't help it, and other changes that society deems desirable like breasts and hips. And suddenly grown men are leering at you like a piece of meat in a way you never experienced before. You used to feel safe in the presence of grown men, and now you feel uncomfortable, but you don't understand why it's changed. You internalize it as something you've done wrong. You didn't ask for this. You start getting comments you're too young to understand, but know they make you feel wrong. Adults in your life start telling you to dress differently to avoid drawing more attention to your body, but you don't understand why all of a sudden your body is something that needs to be covered up. You get mixed signals that tell you that you should want to be pretty and desirable to fit in and be liked, but you're also distressed over the sudden increase in attention you're getting over your body. And on top of all this, you're bleeding every month. It sucks. I desperately wanted to hold on to my childhood, but I felt yanked into a stage of life I wasn't ready for, and I couldn't even explore it at my own pace. I felt such a lack of autonomy. Story 45. Losing your hair, woman or man. I lost 70% of my hair at age 14. I'm 37 now, and my hair is regrowing thanks to being on JAK inhibitors for autoimmune conditions. Throughout the years, I've heard it all. Well, at least you still have hair. Or your hair is curly so it doesn't look that thin. That may sound comforting, but nearly all statements were said in invalidating ways. They downplayed my extreme hair loss, saying it's just hair, or told me to get over it. It really affected my self-esteem for a long time, and there was a huge sense of grief. Woman or man, our hair affects how we feel about our appearance. I am so thankful medication is restoring my hair. 7 weeks on Rinvoq and my hairline has completely filled back in. Story 46. Being ghosted quite suddenly by someone you talked with every day, who told you daily that they loved you and made you love them back. When you've spent a significant amount of time with this person, months not weeks, or a year, and suddenly, gone. No word, nothing. I thought I was completely worthless. Now I think maybe suicide attempt. It will take a long time to heal. Story 47. Having your privacy violated and then being mocked for the things that were found. Over 20 years later, and I still don't allow anyone other than myself to use my devices. Everything is locked or password. And every online account I use that even remotely has social features has every possible privacy option set to max. It's why I hide any journal I might have and then throw it out when it's full. My mom and grandma and siblings would look through my diary and art books when I was a kid, and I'd get in trouble for what they found. I'm 29 now, and it still messes with me. Yeah, well, you just left it sitting out, so it's your fault. I left my stuff in my bedroom. Story 48. Getting cheated. Suffering for past 3 months. It's worse than death. It's almost like all you believed in life is broken and you can never trust again. It's truly awful. Everything that once made you feel safe and secure is ripped out from under you. It's been a couple years and it still makes my heart sink. Story 49. Getting dumped unexpectedly. You question your own thoughts and every relationship for a long time. Even years later, there is always a thought in the back of my mind if I'm being lied to by my husband when he says he loves me. I've worked on it in therapy, but it's impossible to fully trust when the person you love the most in the world can just leave you without warning by choice. Story 50. Being arrested. They make it seem so matter-of-fact on TV. The second time I was arrested, the cop literally told me to reach down and grab more weed I had if I had any, or else there would be more consequences. So I reached down under my car seat where I threw the weed. Cop pulled up to me at a park while I was parked rolling blunts with a friend. As I reached down to grab the weed, he pulled out a gun on me and started screaming to not move or that he'll shoot me. I can still hear him half yelling, half crying as he was saying that. Yep, I'm a white guy with a baby face. He was a rookie cop. Almost became one of those unarmed victims. Story 51. Being diagnosed with autism late in life. For years, I blamed myself for not being able to interact with my peers well and believed that I was fundamentally broken as a person. I didn't know how to articulate my needs and didn't have the self-esteem to ask for help, leading to severe mental illnesses that I won't get into. Getting diagnosed with autism and ADHD in my 20s legit saved my life, but I still deal with a lot of trauma related to the ideas I had about myself growing up. Story 52. Gaslighting. The real kind. You start to question your sanity. Then you think you really are going insane. Then you start getting physical symptoms as well that can't be explained. You go to doctors, therapy, psychiatrists, because you need to get help before you lose it altogether. Then you cut the gaslighter out of your life, and it all makes sense. But you're left with anger and a lot to process. And zero trust in your own judgment of others. Story 53. Having a child on the spectrum/special needs. Every slight they suffer, you suffer. Watching them get ignored, taunted, or struggling with grades is heartbreaking and makes you rage, hate, and cry at the same time. The fear of what will happen to them when you are gone. Constantly worrying, but also loving them so much that you have trouble accepting how others cannot treat them with kindness. Wanting them to gain independence and trying so hard not to overprotect them. Story 54. Having ADHD. It causes a lifetime of pain and misunderstanding, and so many people think you're lying when you have the bravery to be honest about having it. It's like living in an invisible cage. Not to mention that ADHD people are far more susceptible to depression, anxiety, and addiction. ADHD people make up 25% of U.S. prison population. Our medications are not publicly funded and cost hundreds of dollars per 3 months. Sometimes those medications aren't available, and so the pharmacy calls you back 3 times telling you it will be there when it's not, so you go to the pharmacy for no reason multiple times. Then, because you have no meds, you're stuck with brain fog, which many people don't understand, and so they're weirded out when you're lethargic and can't think straight or have a mood swing. Plus the fact that medication stigma definitely exists. I haven't mentioned and won't even go into how children and adults treat children who have ADHD, but suffice it to say, it's terrible. The people who have talked about ADHD publicly have painted a very strange picture of what it actually is, and I find many people think it's a joke or that it's not actually a disorder, especially with this superpower propaganda being spread around like it makes any sense. ADHD is not a superpower. Superpowers are fantastical. ADHD is a chronic disability that society ignores, and people live in pain and denial every day because of it. Rant complete. Story 55. Poverty and homelessness. My kid and I were homeless for a year, and the lack of resources and available housing for homeless families was jarring, and the whole experience was very traumatizing. From losing every material item we had to losing security and stability emotionally. Staying with a friend who didn't want us there, the struggle of having nothing of our own, the experience of a homeless shelter, and how society overlooks or looks past you or straight up wishes you just didn't exist. It's all traumatic and damaging. Even after overcoming it and being in a stable home of our own, but not really, we're still renting, of course. For the past few months, I'm still trying to break out of that mindset. At first, I didn't want to buy anything we couldn't take with us in a few bags if we lost our home and had to leave at a moment's notice. I'm only just now comfortable with accumulating stuff and things again. It's weird. People think and assume there are a lot more social services and resources for poor families than there really are, even for single moms. Especially in a poor, rural area of a red state. Story 56. This is super niche and there are certainly more traumatizing things listed here, but having a reactive dog. People think dogs should be happy and social all the time, so if your dog has behavioral issues, most people will tell you it's because you failed somehow. That you need to be better and do more. The rest of the population will tell you that you're crazy for caring so much about a dog. My senses of sight and hearing have been fine-tuned to an incredible degree. I'm always alert and hyper-aware even when my dog isn't with me. I know more about psychology and learning theory than I ever wanted to. I also relate to dogs entirely differently. Most of the people I know just see dogs as totally loving beings and talk about saving the hard luck rescues. To them, any dog could be saved with enough love. But I am aware of each piece of behavior, too aware of how things could go south. Story 57. Chronic illnesses. People with chronic illnesses often come across as anxious, and those around them can say they are hypochondriacs, but healthy folks don't understand it. An upset stomach can easily turn into a gigantic flare-up that results in months and months of apps and drugs to try. I, personally, have multiple sclerosis and psoriatic arthritis. Every MS flare-up has been go to sleep fine, wake up with no sensation on a side of my body. Or once I leaned over and thought I pulled a muscle, and within 3 hours it spread to my entire rib cage and near immobilized me for weeks. MS flare-up. It is scary AL, and we keep up a strong face most of the time. But you cannot understand how trauma-inducing it is till you go through it. Story 58. Being forgotten/overlooked started as a kid, continues as an adult. Forgotten about at birthday parties, sleepovers, on the playgrounds then, and now I frequently get my name skipped when my boss is listing who's going to be at work on any given day, when scheduled. Still scheduled, just overlooked. I joke about them forgetting me all the time, but it doesn't really help me or them. Story 59. Car accidents. My husband was in an accident in high school and someone from the other car died. Accident was not his fault. The other driver ran the light and was T-boned by my husband. The passenger in the other car died. My husband was hurt, but not badly. He watched them work on the woman and cover her with a sheet. That was 15 to 16 years ago. He still has nightmares about this accident and the lady. Story 60. Parents using fear tactics on their kids. I know this may not seem bad, but hear me out. My father spanked me and my siblings growing up, along with smacking and stuff like that, but that's different. He used a belt to do it, but also he used it as a fear tactic. He would snap the belt really loudly in order to get us to listen, and that helped develop my sensitivity to loud noises. One time a friend took off her belt and started snapping it because she was impressed. It made a loud sound, and since we were in an echoey wire room, it magnified the sound a lot. When she did so, I immediately covered my ears and closed my eyes, kind of folding into myself like a pill bug. I yelled at her to please stop. I didn't know I was yelling, and she stopped but asked if I was okay. I never knew I had this trauma response in me, and I was surprised at my own reaction. Usually loud noises cause me to get scared and anxious, but it's the belt snapping sound that invoked this reaction specifically. I may just be sensitive, I don't know. Story 61. Being adopted as an infant. I lost everything: my family, my language, my heritage and ethnicity. There was a biological process taking place between me and my mother. Being separated from her gave me trauma that I didn't understand until I was an adult. Personally, I feel I have a developmental trauma from this severance. Anecdotally, I have never met a neurotypical, mentally healthy adoptee. We are way overrepresented within mental health care settings and rehabs. We're 4x more likely to attempt suicide and more likely to have addiction issues. I'm not saying untraumatized adoptees don't exist, but generally speaking, we have issues from that maternal severance, even if our mom sucks. Story 62. Finding out that you bought a house attached to a couple who want to listen to their music with a subwoofer and think it's completely normal to use this for a party once or twice a month, and let their kids use it a few times a week, and they truly believe they are entitled to do this, and only a complete AH would ask them to stop. A subwoofer bass will travel to every part of your house no matter what soundproofing you do, so you cannot escape. If you retaliate, you could end up in jail. If you do nothing, you will fall into a dark depression. If you sell, it'll result in financial ruin. If you go down the legal route, you could end up in financial ruin and end up in the exact same position. I wonder how many suicides have been caused because of these things. Story 63. Whether they are minor or major, and also knowing people who've passed away in them. I was involved in a minor accident in my youth and unfortunately had 3 peers/friends pass away in 2 different crashes, all when I was a junior in high school. My uncle also died due to drunk driving when I was much younger. To this day, I have extreme anxiety around driving. I legit get so anxious I throw up if I know we'll be driving through certain areas that are very chaotic and unsafe, and this is when I'm a passenger. I am also very choosy about where I drive because my anxiety is so bad. I've never been in a bad accident by myself, but I'm terrified of it, and it's had a lifelong impact on my relationship with driving/travel. My partner does most of the driving. I don't drive in large cities I'm unfamiliar with, thinking NYC, Miami type cities. I don't take jobs that require a lot of commuting or travel. Weirdly, I work for a traffic engineering firm now, and it's been the best for my driving anxiety. Still scared though. I still wish I never had to drive and could just teleport everywhere. Story 64. Losing shelter is traumatic, but I feel like almost losing shelter is bad too. I am still recovering from almost being homeless. The level of stress I dealt with during that time changed me deeply. I get irrationally angry when someone talks about housing in a nonchalant way. It changed me politically. And anytime a lease comes close to ending, I get incredibly anxious, even though I make more money now than I did back then. Don't worry, I'm in therapy. It's why I know how deep that period of my life went. Story 65. Job loss. I lost my amazing job of 9 years in a 10-minute meeting because I was no longer needed and my department was deemed redundant. As much as you try and listen to the "it's nothing personal" crowd, it is to you. It makes you feel replaceable and flushes the 9 years of work you did down the toilet, because at the end of the day, you feel like it wasn't good enough to keep you. All the corporate talk about how great you're doing and getting high ratings means nothing, because at the end of the day, all it takes is 10 minutes. I've learned that, as cynical as it sounds, going above and beyond means nothing if a CEO wants to shake things up. I still work hard, but I don't go above and beyond anymore to impress a CEO. I've lost that part of me. Maybe that's a good thing, maybe not, but I work for me and watch out for me first now. I mourn the loss of the trust one had, and I feel stupid for thinking a corporation would take care of me. I learned my lesson, but not without scars. After 3 months of not working, I start a contract soon, and I'm working hard on trying to move past this experience so I can show up as my best self, but I fear my best self is lost. This company has been truly kind to me and know my situation, so I'm going to show up for them as hard as I can, and with time, hope this helps the healing process. Story 66. This one is a little specific, but being a leaseholder or property owner and having to evict someone. People always talk about bad landlords, and everyone just sort of figures eviction is like in the movies, where you put a notice on the door and there's probably some sad story where Spider-Man can't make his rent because he's off fighting crime too much. The truth is, it takes months or years to get a bad tenant/roommate out of your life, and they usually reap untold, life-altering financial damage along the way. Even worse if it's someone you know or care about, because they've likely been causing serious financial damage and emotional distress in the lead up to the decision to evict them. Story 67. Relationships in general. Family, friends, romantic, work, etc. People stress people out, and it's only been getting worse to the point where I'm even starting to see extroverts avoiding public spaces. I feel like the only people around me still seeking out other people are either desperately lonely or the toxic users just looking for their next victim. Everyone is hiding from them, and there are no repercussions for their bad behavior as long as they do it legally or don't get caught. It's ruining our society, which is already near its breaking point with everything else going on. Story 68. Just living with autism in general. Imagine you live your whole life like this. Everyone is playing a game, and they don't tell you about the game, and they don't tell you the rules. Something like that. I mostly struggle socially, but over the years the amount of people ignoring me, starting conversation with another person whole I'm talking, laughing at me, and just making up social rules on spot. I just kinda stopped caring. Like, it's comforting knowing that I don't need to have a social life and can just do my own stuff as I want. I know a few cool people that I like, and I have many hobbies and interests, so I'm not alone in my basement all day, lol. But yeah, I probably have a bunch of mental illness I don't know about or rationalize as autism, LMAO. Story 69. Almost dying from a deadly virus, in a coma and on a ventilator, suffering with over a year of daily therapies to relearn how to do everything from how to swallow, to how to walk, to how to wipe your own butt. Having lingering effects for 3 years and loaded up on medication to fix every organ it destroyed, only to then see that every news post about it on Facebook has people giving laughing reactions and commenting it must be election year, lol. Even worse, when you explain your story and they ask the questions to try to discredit you. Like, you must be old, you forgot to mention you have an immune problem, right? Were you on Remdesivir? That's poison. And when you answer no to all their dumb questions you get, you are an agent of the left / a crisis actor / the mark of the beast. Yes, I was really called these things. It's traumatic because you know what you went through and wouldn't even wish it on those idiots who respond that way. It's like I survived this traumatic experience and these people laugh at it. Story 70. Oftentimes, being homeschooled / unschooled. I don't know any homeschoolers who had a good experience with it. For me, it was incredibly socially isolating, and especially with abusive parents at home, it was torture to have no time away or anyone to confide in for help. Plus, a subpar education can screw you for the rest of your life. I know a girl who was homeschooled who was unable to go to college. I was unschooled, and the feeling of being stupid / incompetent affects absolutely everything. Story 71. Abusive parents, whether it is due to actual malicious intent or just plain ignorance. The parents you have determine so much of how you turn out, basic biology obs, but also how they socialize you really follows you throughout life. If you're unlucky, you can be messed up enormously in a way that it shows in every aspect of your life, especially relationships / friendships, and just feeling like you belong and are welcomed in this world. Therapy for something like this is also a massive task because there is so much to unpack. It's not a 1 or 10 session situation. Also, society hates to hear you talk about how crap your parents are or were, so you have to pay a therapist if you want to really be heard and held through the fallout. You also have to basically pretend you're just as well adjusted as everyone seems to be around you, because ultimately you exists to work and must work to survive. So while coping mechanisms you lean to use to cope with the abuse, like freezing to dissociate, worked very well, they're not practical in a capitalist society where you have to numb and work just to barely survive. Story 72. Having a medical food sensitivity / restriction. My child is 8 and can't have gluten, celiac. They miss out on so much, and we have to research and question every single thing that goes into their mouth. Our own family doesn't understand the severity and will make comments about us being hippies, or it won't kill them, it will, just slowly, to have gluten. Or we're bad parents for not letting them have fun treats at parties, etc. It's mentally exhausting for all of us, not to mention extremely expensive. I wish people who don't deal with it could be a little more empathetic. We would have never chosen this life for our child or ourselves, but it's the hand we've been dealt and we're doing the best we can. Story 73. Losing a parent, or any loved one, I guess, even though they're elderly. My dad was almost 90 when he passed just over a year ago, and it still affects me so much. It doesn't make much sense to me, because a man of that age that led a long, fulfilling life should be easier to deal with when you think about it rationally. I guess emotions aren't rational. I lost my other parent and all my grandparents and aunts long ago, and I don't remember struggling to deal with them nearly as much. Story 74. Someone already mentioned getting fired, but I figured I'd mention layoffs as well. I got laid off in 2020, COVID-related reasons LOL, at my first real job post-college. I'm at a much better job now, but the effects of the layoff still haunt me. Knowing I could be laid off at any given moment because I'm either too expensive or the least impactful fire on my team and my boss has to cut someone, quite frankly sucks. Every vague hey and Slack or busy /touch base meeting scheduled on my calendar without context sends me into a panic. My biggest takeaway from being laid off: job stability is not your ability to stay at one job for the rest of your life, but your ability to pick yourself up and find a new one after you're let go. Story 75. A botched medical procedure. I once had to get an infected ingrown toenail removed. I knew the lidocaine shots would hurt the most, but at least the rest would be smooth sailing. Well, whether it was the person who administered the shots, or I am just tolerant to lidocaine, the shots did very little, if any, numbing. However, they had already begun under the assumption that it would kick in very soon. When I told them I wasn't numb, they then gave me 3 more shots of it, and still no numb feeling. Since they had already cut half of the nail, I decided to suck it up and grit my teeth through it. For an extra 40 minutes, I got to feel every moment the little snipper cutting down the nail repeatedly, because come to find out, my toenails are very thin, and when they tried to remove the ingrown nail, it just kept breaking off into tinier pieces they had to dig for again, dragging out what should have been a 15-minute procedure into an hour-long session of pain. I both stupidly but also thankfully refused the permanent chemical treatment at the end, which would have been a few minutes of having a long Q-tip shoved down the sides of the toe, chemically burning the area where the ingrown toenail was. After all was said and done, I received 6 extremely painful lidocaine shots that didn't numb me, some mild trauma that now makes me hesitant at the idea of ever going to a podiatrist again, and I owed an apology to the doctor and nurses for cursing loudly. Story 76. The medical trauma of seeking a diagnosis and being told there's nothing wrong with you. Last year, I was told to lose weight to fix the neurological issues I was having. I wasn't even overweight. She refused to do further tests and told me to come back in 6 months. I had emergency neurosurgery less than a month later. I have EDS. Long story short, my body doesn't hold my joints together very well and I am falling apart, LOL. I was only diagnosed at 20 years old, and that was only through finding out about it on my own and fighting for a diagnosis. I've had joint issues since I was 4 years old, and it feels like I grew up in hospitals. As a kid, I was told that I needed to push through the pain and ignore it, when really I needed to learn to listen to my body and recognize when it was time to stop. I was told that there was nothing wrong with me and I was only hurting because I was focusing on it, that it wasn't real. Or I was making it up for attention. In my life, I've likely seen almost 100 doctors. Of those, I can only think of 3 that took me seriously. Story 77. Being forced to do things because they're good for you without further explanation as a kid. This can be applied to basically everything. With vegetables, it cultivates an unhealthy relationship to food. With medical things, it causes fears of doctors and makes the adult children not take care of themselves because of the self-care reminding them of how those things used to go. I've had 7 cavities taken care of just a few days ago after I finally gathered enough courage to go to the dentist by myself for the first time. Took me years. Story 78. Caring for a loved one with dementia. My grandparents were married for over 70 years, and now if we ask my gran about grandpa, we get a blank stare. My uncle broke down sobbing the day she no longer recognized him. When she asks for her mom, who passed in 1968, it is devastating. I hate having to lie to her and tell her that she's just popped to the post office because we can't traumatize her by telling her that she is dead and that she died so long ago. She will forget that she asked straight after, but the guilt of lying is horrible. It is devastating that someone can spend their whole life with someone and forget them because dementia robs all those happy memories at the end of someone's life. Story 79. Losing your hearing. It can make finding and keeping a job extremely difficult. Besides this, it's socially isolating. It can also make you super paranoid. I learned that hearing loss is correlated with an increased risk of developing certain mental issues like dementia and schizophrenia. It affected my mental health and made me feel very alone. I was walking around almost deaf half the time for 2 years because I had antibiotic-resistant ear infections. I had days where I could hear really well and other days where I could barely hear, and it made it difficult to work. I had customers that would get angry at me for asking them to speak louder. I could hear most people, but some people are soft-spoken and would just repeat themselves at the same volume. You know, the kind of people that even with good hearing you could barely understand them. My retail job didn't accommodate it at all and left me working alone during rushes at a job where you are supposed to have 3 people minimum at the desk. I was constantly afraid I was going to lose my job while I was supporting my husband, because at the time I was sponsoring him for citizenship. Hard to explain, but basically during that process he doesn't have a work visa yet, but I have to report my income for the year to prove I make enough to support us without government assistance. I also became more paranoid and anxious, because on days where my sinuses were clear, my hearing was suddenly good but too sensitive. Things would seem louder and closer than they actually were. Or I couldn't hear when someone was coming up behind me. It felt like people were constantly sneaking up on me. I also gave up on socializing with friends, co-workers, and even family because it felt like too much work to talk to people. Story 80. Being the invisible person in a group. It has happened to me more than once. Hurts like bad, but one instance stung especially badly. I saw a photo someone posted on FB of a gathering of people in a sport I was deeply immersed in. These were people I saw and trained with and worked alongside every day. We laughed and cried together, spent early mornings and late nights and long days together. The photo was labeled everybody. I wasn't in it. Likely not intentional, but being forgotten again, or worse yet, the idea that they remembered me but didn't consider me part of the group broke my heart in that instant. I've never said a word to anyone about it before now.